ever heard of Gingrich Yagoda, who was the originator of the Gulag system in Russia. And apparently Stalin appointed him. The Russian Jews were very prominently represented in the revolution, the communist revolution.
Right, yes.
Yeah. And Yagoda, according to Plocker, was kind of independently responsible for at least 13 million deaths. He originated, and then he had a little cadre, all Jewish, who administered the Gulag system.
Right.
Yeah. And this is the dark side.
Right.
That Jews, as well as everybody else,
there's no difference. People are people.
Yeah. So I thought it was very interesting that this was published in an Israeli newspaper, and not even Haaretz, which is the most Gideon Levy and some of the Amira Haas. I mean, they're blowing the whistle in Israel all the time.
Right.
And we never see that in the U.S. press.
Right.
The Israeli papers are actually much more honest.
Right.
I've even seen things in the Jerusalem Post, which is the most conservative.
Yes.
That cast a very negative light on Israeli policy.
Well, when they report on rabbis calling for the deaths of Palestinians, including children, or telling Jewish people not to rent to Palestinians, I mean, it shows.
Now, you quote one phrase I wrote down here in your book from Deuteronomy. You should read the rest of Deuteronomy if you want to see where some of this racism comes from, because it's pretty awful.
Right.
But one of the nice phrases you quote is, "You shall love the stranger," and so that is the stranger is the other, upon which it's easy to project the unspeakable, the dark side. We are good, they are bad. The Manichaean view of mankind, and that is something that you came upon. That represented your integration of all human beings into one vision.
Right, because you can talk about self and other, but really there is no other.
Yeah.
And at a certain point there is no self. But the other, when you project these images onto the other, what you're seeing is not that person over there. What you're seeing is the reflection of your unexamined mind and your unintegrated fear upon the other. So it's almost as if you're playing God. I'll use myself. It's almost as if I was playing God by superimposing these enemy images onto people who I thought of as Arabs or Palestinians. And so I wouldn't see the humanity in that person. I was seeing what I wanted to see projected from my own mind.
And what you're saying is that's from your own mind.
Yes.
Okay, so it is projected.
Yes.
It is projected.
Denial and projection were the two primary
it is
psychological
projected.
tools.
And you came to a sense of integration, and part of that integration, part of that journey toward integration, you talked about the similarities in the book between the Torah and the Quran.
Right.
How similar they are. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I mean, for example, I quote the Talmud, which says, he who takes one life, it's as if he had destroyed the world, and he who saves a life, it's as if he had saved the world. And I do believe that. I believe that every single person has it within themselves to save the world. I mean, there's like an interrelatedness of being. One action, you might just do one kind action to a stranger, and who knows what kind of reverberation throughout history that could have. Maybe the stranger was about to jump off a bridge, and by a kind action a kind act of another stranger, he gets his life together and contributes to mankind. But I found out that phrase from the Talmud is almost the exact phrase is in the Quran, and there is the Quran talks about compassion quite a lot. I haven't studied the Quran, but from talking to Muslims who I met. But what I wanted to say was, during my awakening, what occurred was that I lost my attachment to a particular exclusive or limited identity, to a core Jewish identity. When that attachment was relinquished, and I didn't relinquish it, it just suddenly was no longer there, that's when compassion arose. And that's when I realized that I could stand that when you stand in the shoes of the other, you can see from a 360-degree perspective, and that's real compassion. And because you can see from any point of view, any perspective, clarity arises with compassion. Fear, on the other hand, because it colors the way you see the world and prevents you from seeing the world as it really is, fear is always accompanied by confusion. And there's mass confusion now, which is why people are demonizing these Palestinian people and others.
And Iranians.
And Iranians. And I want to say, Jack, I was in the West Bank. I was in the West Bank. And I've traveled, you know, in Asia and in South America. The Palestinian people are some of the softest people I've ever met. And not one Palestinian, when they've heard I was Jewish, and I told everybody I was Jewish, not one had any kind of negative reaction. And they often told me, it was almost a common thing, no matter where I was, whether it was East Jerusalem or Beilin or Ramallah, wherever I was, it's not about Jews and Muslims or Christians, it's about human beings. The problem is not religion, the problem is Zionism, an ideology that wants to take our land.
Right. And as you may know, Alan Hart, the veteran Middle Eastern correspondent, has written a 3-volume set called Zionism, the Real Enemy of the Jews.
Right.
And it's interesting that Anna Balcer wrote the preface to your book, and in that she describes her awakening coming not from reading so much as from direct experience.
Right.
Where she, as you, she went over there, she saw how gentle the Palestinian culture in fact was.
Right.
And she saw the way they were suffering and what Israel was doing to them.
Right.
So hers was an experience, her cognitive dissonance was based on direct experience, and yours was supplemented the dissonance that you encountered from reading, from sources that you trusted.
Right.
And you checked them out.
Yes.
Yes.
I really checked them out. I mean, Anna is a real blessing to mankind. I mean, she is someone who exudes integrity and kindness. One of the things I want to say is that, compassion, when compassion replaces fear, it is such a huge relief to see people as human beings, rather than the enemy, rather than the other. It is a huge, and you don't even know how much you were suffering prior to the awakening. I didn't know how much I was really suffering. Once I had the release of these enemy images and this terrible, this rather negative and dehumanizing worldview, once that was gone, I could look back and through comparison, I could see how the new state of consciousness, where I was a human being like other human beings, was such a relief compared to the old state of consciousness in which I was suffering.
Yeah. And this awakening sounds very much like what actually an experience I had when I was about 20, and others have described as a mystical kind of experience, where there's an integration where you don't see any distinctions.
Right.
In my case, it was not only not recognizing distinctions between people, but recognizing distinctions at all, what we call ego boundaries, that we are all participating in something called being.
Right.
And we happen to be conscious representatives of being.
Yes.
And the objective of evolution, I thought at the time, and I still think is a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
The objective of evolution, there's some reason that evolution is proceeding as it is toward increasing consciousness.
Right, I agree with that.
It's almost as if there's a force.
I agree.
Where being wants to be conscious of itself and wants to affirm itself, because there's a feeling of love, of compassion, of empathy for all of sensate life that comes from these experiences.
Right, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And that release that you experienced, the release from prison.
Right.
It actually was a gaining of your own identity.
Right.
So you could free it up from this collective identity.
Yes.
I am a Jew.
Right.
You see. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
You saw yourself, and what I represent 0.2%. I mean 0.2, not 2%, but 0.2% of mankind. That's a pretty small club to belong to, and now you belong to the universe.
Right. Exactly. I mean, now you can identify with all people. You can see the suffering, the pain in all people, and it's not, just so the viewer doesn't get confused, it's not like I gained anything. What happened was I lost the obstructions to who I always was.
The fence around your actual human identity.
Right, and that was a false identity that I lost. So the false identity that I had manufactured through my mind and collective memory, that false identity, once it was gone, I was free to be who I always already am.
Right.
And that's the way it is for all of us. It's more a subtraction of the illusions that prevent us from seeing reality. Right. It was a relinquishment of unreality so I could be reality.
It's what the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard, who's credited as being the first existentialist, he used a word for it that I still remember from a philosophy class back in college 100 years ago. He called it the invidious distinctions that human beings create, the categories we put ourselves in, that obliterates what he called the only true reality, which is the individual, the human individual.
Yeah, just imagine if people didn't categorize things, if they didn't have to say, well, okay, so you're Jewish, so you're better or you're worse, you're Palestinian, so you're worse or you're better. Just imagine if we just saw people as people, how much different the world could be. And I just want to say, Jack, that you know, a lot of people who are very pro-Israel, who are listening to us, they may be justifying their belief that I must be anti-Semitic or a self-hating Jew, and it's not that at all. I am not anti-Israel, and I don't even want to call myself pro-Palestinian. I'm pro-human rights. I believe that all people have equal rights. I want to see Jews and Palestinians, Israelis and Muslims. I want to see everybody having the same quality of life that gives them the freedom for self-determination. I am really pro-Israeli in that sense, because by working towards Israel taking account of itself and treating other people fairly, that is of great service to the Jewish people and to the Israeli people, because it can end conflict.
Yes, and many wise observers in Israel, including some, you know, Amir Haas and Gideon Levy, and another, I think, a very creditable source, a French Israeli named Michel Warshawski, who wrote a book called Torah, an Open Tomb, and established the website called, and an organization called the Alternative Information Center. These people are really seeing Israel headed for a cliff.
Yes.
That what they're doing is completely unsustainable. The way I put it, they were built on a very unsteady foundation to begin with.
Right.
Israel established itself through terrorism and ethnic cleansing.
Correct.
And they've covered it up with lies ever since.
Yes, that's exactly what's happened.
And it really has to be somehow rebuilt from the foundation up.
I agree.
And the only way you do that is to go back to the beginning and honor the right of return of the Palestinians. And what it means is you give up a Jewish state. You can no longer call yourself a Jewish state. And the trade-off is you can become a normal country. You can become a normal, multi-ethnic, democratic country.
With a very large Jewish character in that country.
Yes, and of course. And it can still be the homeland for any Jews who want to live there. And they'll have Jewish communities, Jewish culture, and so forth.
I agree.
But it has to be the homeland for the people who are indigenous to that area.
Right.
It has to be the homeland for the Palestinians.
And what many Jews would think if they heard you say that would be, how could that be? Because we can't live with the Palestinians because they'll try to kill us. And what these Jewish people who think like that don't understand is that the Palestinian people are tired of violence.
Yeah.
And it's only a small minority that resort to violence anyway, but it's the actions of Israel that creates the conditions where violence can arise. When you deprive people of their homes, their land, when you kill, when you torture almost every male, when you call the women whores, when you beat up the fathers, when you raid homes for no reason at all, when you destroy 12 houses for every single incident of stone throwing or verbal non-acceptance of the occupation. It's just horrendous.
It's not a way to earn friends.
It's not a way to earn friends.
Anyway, we're about out of time.
Okay.
Let me remind the viewers again, the book, Breakthrough, Transforming Fear into Compassion. The websites, I think, will be on the screen.
Amazon, they can get it at Amazon or my website.
Rich's website and Amazon.com.
My website is www.richardforer.com.
It'll be on the screen.
And it's also available in Kindle at Amazon and at my website in all other electronic book formats.
Okay. All right, Rich. Thank you.